Thank you everyone for sticking around for the couple of last panels we have before we close out for the day. I hope all of you guys are enjoying this DLT Compass as hosted by LongHash. Thanks for having me. So my name is Sean. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Digix, a company that tokenizes physical gold and issue a token called DGX where every token represents 1 gram of gold. The entire gold holdings are fully auditable and they're all based out here in Singapore as well as in Canada. So without further ado, I'd like to go straight into the panel. But before that, I'd like to give each of these panelists here some airtime to introduce what their project is about and the current stage and progress of them. Yep, so Luka, please begin.
Thank you, Sean. So basically, I'm coming from æternity, which is a protocol, blockchain protocol, public one. We call it the blockchain 3.0 because we kind of looked at it at a problem of scalability, interoperability, and a couple of other things, and we decided to build a new blockchain platform from scratch. We launched in November, and we have been fully operational and up and running since then. Quite stable, and we have a quite great deal of progress in many ways, basically from enterprise to other things. So some specifics are we are we have native embedded oracles inside of the protocol, hybrid proof of stake and proof of work algorithm used for different kinds of things, and we built the protocol from scratch based on Erlang, which means, and we use something called a state channel to achieve good scalability as opposed to anything else. Thank you.
Björn?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Sean. My name is Björn Wagner. I'm here with Parity Technologies. We are one of the so-called OGs in the infrastructure play for blockchains. We've been around for, I think, like almost 4 years now. Started off with building the most performant Ethereum client and have ventured off in really spearheading the development, particularly in the public blockchain infrastructure space. Now we are trying to push the boundaries of what's possible in the public space as well as the enterprise space with particularly 2 products. One is called Substrate and the other one is an interoperability protocol called Polkadot.
Hi, I'm Dieter from the Web3 Foundation. So we are trying to build out the Web3 technology stack, and we work very closely with Parity Technologies. One of our core products right now, which we think is layer 1 of this technology stack, is the Polkadot protocol. So our job is to develop, to really build the use. To really develop usage of Polkadot and build out the Web3 stack from that and further up as well.
Right, so before we go into address the actual theme of this panel, I had the privilege to actually be here with all of them, and we all, as what Björn mentioned, we've been around for quite a while, almost as known as like the OGs of this space. We've been around for like since 2015 or 2016. But along all these times, the last 3 to 4 years, we might be clouded with a lot of different jargons that we are very familiar with, right? So for the benefit of this crowd here, I'd like to address 2 particular terms before we go further in depth into our discussion. Firstly is about the idea of distributed applications. Secondly is about the idea of interoperability. So I'd like to actually ask Dieter, right? What can you explain a little bit more about what distributed apps are and how do they benefit the traditional man on the street?
Yeah, so I think distributed applications are very similar to applications that are applications in a non-distributed way, so like centralized applications, except they're run on a distributed blockchain network. So I mean, I think a lot of the times they can really help in the disintermediation angle and kind of distributing trust amongst the various parties. So for example, one good example I always use is having, say, like a private blockchain network or a consortium chain in the insurance industry, where like sellers of insurance, so insurance companies can write smart contracts encapsulating their insurance agreements, and this can be used to connect with buyers of these policies. And in this way, you really lay out kind of what your insurance agreement is in like an enforceable way that's encapsulated in a smart contract.
Right, Luka, as I saw on the Eternity website as well that you guys were developing a couple of identity kind of like products. How does this relate to enterprise use cases of identity? If you could mention a bit more about them.
Many. I mean, we have. This is one of the things that we started. So it has to do with two things. First is the naming system that we employ. That means that the private key. We have a couple of solutions actually. So, but the basic idea is that your private key is no longer your private key. You can name it as whatever you want with an auction system. A little bit similar to the DNS and the registration of the domain names. The second part is actually so that you record. So our blockchain, majority of the transactions are happening off-chain using something state channels. So identity is something which is kind of essential because otherwise you would have a lot of disputes and you would have a lot of forking. So one of the things, couple of things that we're actually doing in the enterprise is document management system and identity management system, meaning that just by using a certain DApp, that you basically, all of the participants, other participants of this DApp know that you have been authorized to use it. They don't necessarily need to know who you are or what do you do. They just need to know that you're authorized and they can trust you in this layer. So there's actually many ways, many pilots that we're doing or investments that we have done in the space and people are utilizing this. So one of them is also a notary service. So if you want to verify a certain document or a diploma or something like that, again, you don't need to trust the piece of paper or piece of document. You just trust the chain that verified the whole thing. So zero knowledge proof built on these kind of things. So I think this is one of the major use cases that will come in the next couple of years in the enterprise sector. I mean, not only in the enterprise sector, in the public sector, in the government sector. So notarization is one of the monopoles of any kind of municipality, a government, regional or otherwise. I mean, in your case, in the case of Digix, you need to certify that something is existing and deposited. The way that you do that is by someone notarizing that this bar of gold is tokenized and is deposited somewhere. Because again, you need to kind of relay trust to someone. So, yeah.
Right, yeah, I do agree as well. I think this is probably one of the major use case of this whole ledger technology itself, which is to track and notarize documents. In fact, for local context, we had a company called OpenCert, which was endorsed by GovTech, who recently actually tokenized the entire educational certificates around Singapore with participating universities and colleges. So back to the second point on interoperability, I'd like to ask Björn actually, would you be able to explain to the crowd here, what do interoperable blockchains actually really do?
Well, so far there are no such thing as interoperable blockchain, so it's kind of difficult to define that. I guess there are certain perspectives you can take on what it could mean for a blockchain to be interoperable to another. So some people define it as the simple notion of being able to access certain assets. Closely defined assets on other, blockchains, right? Being able to, for example, control Bitcoin, one Bitcoin or one USDC stablecoin in an Ethereum smart contract could be called interoperability. Some others could claim that interoperability has to go further, right? It has to say that whatever is being made interoperable also has to live in the same realms, in the sense of it has to be secured by the same things. So you need to have the same guarantees towards an outcome on either of these two things that can communicate with each other in order for it to be truly interoperable. And I guess there are different projects that take different stances at it, such as like Cosmos, as we heard, Eternity, right? Polkadot is taking an approach. But in our opinion, the holy grail of interoperability really is to enable any kind of like blockchain machine or such a machine that gets the guarantees that the blockchain provide to be able to communicate and interact with anything else that's being secured, such as a blockchain. So making no assumptions over what this data is that's being transferred, if it's an asset itself, or if it's just like a different piece of information that's being transferred from one place to the other.
Would you be able to give one example of a current use case where an asset could be interoperable between two different blockchains, and what kind of blockchains would they be?
Right. For example, a pretty straightforward example from the public blockchain space is currently in the Ethereum space, for example. You have this blockchain and you have loads of different applications. One of these building blocks or applications are stablecoins. One rather prominent example is Maker with its stablecoin DAI system. Now, the DAI is a collateralized stablecoin, so it relies on collateral to keep its value stable. Now, currently it relies entirely on the Ethereum coin, so Ether, right? And is thereby subject to its volatility, which is pretty bad. And they want to move to a multi-collateral system, so diversify the assets that can be used as a collateral. Now, in Ethereum currently, you are locked in to, you can only choose as collateral from the assets that are available to the Ethereum blockchain, such as Ether or the ERC20 tokens. Now, they would be incredibly interested in being able to, for example, have Bitcoin available to be used as collateral for their stablecoin, or a future Facebook coin, right? Libra, as we heard. So by trying to, implement a protocol such as Polkadot, as we do, that enables smart contracts on Ethereum to really be able to access these assets, such as a Libra coin, we try to solve their issue. So that would be a concrete example how it would be used.
Right. Just for context as well, so a stable coin in this example we're mentioning about, it's a token that potentially represents either one fiat dollar held in a bank reserve. So there could be a dollar token itself that represents $1 US. There could be a token that represents €1 and stuff like that. And that's potentially pretty much one of the bigger use cases of what blockchain is to most of the enterprises as well as companies who are on the entire blockchain ecosystem. So let's jump straight into project-specific kind of like questions that I want to ask to address the theme of today's discussion, which is that no blockchain exists on its own. So for Dieter, I want to ask you, like, with regards to the Web3 ecosystem, a lot of the apps are built on top of them. What do you feel is the goals that the foundation has to ensure that all the apps could be as collaborative as it gets?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we really, I mean, the Web3 Foundation views like the first layer of the Web3 stack as being these kind of layer one solutions, such as Polkadot, such as smart contract platforms in general, and other kind of platforms that developers will use to develop the apps. So, part of our goal in kind of encouraging the build out of the stack and kind of higher layers of the stack is that everything that we fund development of should be open source. So like Polkadot, which we're which we're funding development of, is going to be open source, and all our other projects too, we make sure are open source, and that's so we encourage developers not to kind of reinvent the wheel when they're building their dApps and other aspects of the stack, but to really kind of build off what's been built before. And so we do have a grants program, which is quite active of the moment, which is really right now based around Substrate and Polkadot, and building out those areas, but which we will expand probably as those areas get more and more built out. And again, with that grants program, I mean we're funding enterprises, individuals, all sorts of, not really enterprises, but mostly kind of smaller organizations. But again, with the results of that, we do expect them to open source their development.
Right. Yeah. So I do encourage and urge everyone here who is looking towards this grant structure from the Web3 to actually reach out to Dieter after this panel to actually find out a little bit more about them. So the next thing to Luka right here, you've been one of the earlier projects since 2016 in the entire space. How do you measure the success metrics of a successful blockchain, for example? There are many different ways to measure them. And not everything is quantifiable, but from your own personal opinion, what do you feel is a good way of understanding this?
Well, that's a hard one, difficult one, especially if you think about, every blockchain protocol, open source blockchain protocol. I don't know. I think a measure of success is, I don't know, if you're alive after 2 years and, you didn't burn in flames. That's the first one. But one thing that you need to understand, everybody is talking about blockchain protocols as if they are companies, which they're not. They're movements. They're open source products that are more like, I don't know, on a protocol level, IPv6 or TCP/IP than a proper product. You have companies like Mozilla that built a browser around it and a business around it, but I guess right now it's the same kind of land grab as it was during the internet era, that everybody's looking for, a bigger company that's going to implement their technology and a bigger chunk of money they're going to, eat out there. So I wouldn't say that these are measures of success. What we're seeing right now, a lot of things, a lot of PR coming out. This blockchain partnered with this company, with BMW, with Deloitte, with this one, with that one. But I think the true measure of success is going to be like longevity. So 3 years from now, who is still going to be standing? Who is still going to be used by the community? Because this is one of the things. Ethereum is super strong and super healthy. Why? Because it has a lot of developers building on top of that. Polkadot, Parity, Web3 Foundation, these are the things that are healthy in terms of a lot of people building, on one hand, even like pet projects on top of that, not even commercial applications on a massive scale. So I think this whole industry still needs a little bit of maturing time. It's very, very, very important that there's a lot of experiments and a lot of attempts, especially with the enterprise sector. But I think a lot of things that are actually happening right now, or a lot of questions, especially this one, what is a measure of success of an industry which is 10 years old, and companies or protocols that are 2 or 3 or 4 years old. So if we take that time back into any kind of other protocol like internet, mobile, I don't know, VHS, electricity, FM radio, this is like very nascent. So
sure, yeah.
I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah, but from your conversations with enterprises, what are some of the quick factors that you could point out, perhaps in a couple of quick points on that? Yeah.
Major thing is that every single enterprise that we're talking about is dead scared that they're going to miss out. So just like a lot of companies, a lot of enterprises missed out on the mobile, on the internet, they're kind of laggards and they kind of lost the competitive edge. So they're afraid of that. The second thing is that they're afraid of being disrupted. So we're talking a lot with insurance companies, we're talking a lot with I don't know, banks and financial institutions, and the major problem with them is that they do not understand the nature of the technology. They understand it on one plane, but they do not understand the fundamentals of the whole thing. So they still are trying to utilize something called a private blockchain, a DLT, whatever, and in situations where its major application is just PR. So permissionless, trustless, censorship-resistant, massive like applications of a blockchain in majority of the enterprises are not necessary. So maybe in a consortium way where they interact within large, on a, let's say, a global scale, yes. But all of the things that we're seeing so far are small experiments that are used to learn a little bit more, a little bit deeper about the technology. So in 5 years' time, when it's mature, hopefully, they're going to be able to call themselves blockchain natives. I mean, still, we're working with one specific insurance. It's a small one, a regional one, but they're still not internet native. So they're still not fully digital in this is 2019, middle of 2019, and they're still using old school methods like handwritten contracts and like printouts and fax machines and stuff like this. So this is one of the things that we're trying to kind of help them to have a leap into the blockchain space. But again, it's still super early. There's still a lot of practical applications with true utility to be done. But yeah. There's a lot of effort on all of the sides.
Yeah, I do agree as well. Like the entire space is still in its very early stages. There's a lot of fear about missing out, about disruption. But if we take away the entire facade of all these, the main thing that we really need to be able to do here is to self-educate and to actually learn more about these fundamentals of what the space could actually potentially bring, which could be coming to conferences like this to meet with people, to network, and to just find out a little bit more about what they can do for your business. Just the last point to Parity with Björn here, right? What is your vision when it comes to the entire launch of 2019 for Polkadot and its own enterprise adoption?
So one general thing that I would like to see happening over the next years is, and what we are actively working on and are very passionate about, is bringing these two worlds of the enterprise, very private permission blockchain world together, way closer together with the public blockchain space. You know, these open source ecosystems. And there are two reasons for why I think that's actually critical for enterprises to actually draw value from this whole thing. Reason number one is, I think it has become very clear over the last years that most of the critical innovations in the core infrastructure space come from the public blockchain space. So if you see all the recent research and development going into consensus, for example, right? The most interesting stuff has come from projects that are public blockchain first projects, right? Same as in the state machine side. So if you look at like how do we achieve confidentiality, privacy in blockchains, right? How do we make sure that people can actually use these systems without suffering from like privacy problems? Then when we look at all the innovation that, for example, Zcash, right? The electric coin company in the US has been driving forward, or Starkware from Israel has been driving forward. It's quite incredible, right? And what I don't want to see is that the enterprises get left behind and are locked out of these innovations because they bet on private blockchain only vendors, right? That is one reason. So like keeping up with innovation and actually getting to a point where like this core infrastructure facilitates your requirements and needs with regard to throughput, security, confidentiality, and so forth. That's reason number one. The other reason is we really want to eliminate the dichotomy that exists between private and public networks. So what we've seen, right, over the past few years, loads of companies became enterprises became interested in blockchain. Said like, hey, what can I do, right? Let's get started. A lot of them chose Ethereum initially, right? Huge developer base, lots of tooling around, like actually developing something. But then they figured out after, you know, first, second POC often, it just doesn't meet their requirements with regard to throughput, with regard to sovereignty over like what is being deployed, right? What happens if there's a bug, an error, I can't roll back if I'm deployed on a public chain. And further, they said like everything's public, I don't have any kind of confidentiality guarantees that I would need. Now, and they've gone from there to saying like, okay, we either fork Ethereum to end up with Chrome, or we use something like Fabric, Hyperledger Fabric, or other protocols. But then, right, they have no guarantees whatsoever to eventually, you know, benefit from all the network effects that will happen on public blockchains, right? To access all these assets that are potentially extremely interesting, right? So what we are trying to do in Parity is like really build and design software that allows you to use the software in both environments. And not necessarily have to say like, oh, I either go full on permissioning private and like I'm being locked out, I'm being isolated from that world, but rather maybe have a middle step, right? And we have taken very practical steps to enable anyone building with this kind of technology that we are launching to, you know, maybe go this middle ground. Say like, I still have full control over my platform, right? But I still can access these assets. And in the future, if I have enough confidence over the public blockchain that I want to connect to, I might even give up securing my own blockchain and like really integrate more deeply with this public blockchain.
What would you say is one of the compromise between adopting on the private versus the public chain? One compromise is like...
with regard to software or network?
Network.
Network, okay. So one compromise, for example, is if I choose to go private network, right? Currently, I have full control over what that network is. But downside is I also have to secure it myself, and I'm locked out of all these assets and all the interesting things happening on other networks. And that's what we're trying to eliminate. And like, there's actually one very interesting fact around blockchain software in general that a lot of people don't realize. Now, the added benefit of using software that's being deployed in the public space is that you have way higher assurances over the security guarantees it gives you. Because, like, practically speaking, for example, Ethereum currently, the software Ethereum that's running the mainnet has a 10 billion bug bounty on it, right? It's running in the most hostile environment. It's just out there in the open, and any hacker can try to hack it and can, by shorting the system on an exchange, actually gain from a hack, right? If you utilize a private-only blockchain technology, you will only know if it's safe, right, until after you've been hacked. Only until after you've deployed all your valuable assets on the blockchain, because before there's no incentive to actually hack it, right? And I think that's a very interesting aspect.
Right. Yeah. So thank you for sending your questions onto the Slido app. Unfortunately, the iPad here just ran out of battery, but I had a chance to actually remember one question. Was for someone that actually asked a really interesting one. Is how do you align governance across different chains? And with the whole idea about interoperability, like how do you measure that? And if anyone here has any other questions, please feel free to shout it out or just ask around here. Yeah, this question is open for the floor here. How would you be able to measure efficiently the idea about governance? Let me just pull out the question. Yeah,
governance in
alignment of governance.
In let's say in the situation of interoperability of chains, or
yes, yeah.
I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean.
So our take on that is the following. What is the smallest common denominator between these different blockchain networks that enterprises or the public space want to use? I would claim it's whatever that is running needs to be secure, right? It should run as described, right? That's a common denominator. And if I can, benefit from the network effect of pooling these resources to secure all our chains, then this is a net positive for me, right? And there shouldn't be a lot of arguments around that, right? Whereas if I go a step further and say like, oh, I'm trying to align with every enterprise out there and every public blockchain on, this is exactly the machine that is running. It's a smart contract machine or it's not a smart contract machine, then you're not going to get anywhere, right? And you're going to end up in your silo again.
Right. So I have a question here. I think it's directed towards Dieter. Even when blockchains are interoperable, will we ever see? Sorry, not the question. The next question is, how do we incentivize players from all these different blockchains to come together? For now, everyone is just trying to attract developers and DApps onto their own chain. What do you feel are other forms of incentivization for developers to come on board the entire Web3 framework? Apart from just like grants and stuff like that, is there anything else that we are missing in this space?
Yeah, so sorry, apart from grants and...
Apart from grants, like, is there any other forms of incentivization mechanism? It could be anyone here and on the panel that could address this. What do you feel are ways to incentivize developers to come forward to build together in this ecosystem?
Well, I think ways basically that allow their application to get used. So, I mean, for something like an interoperability platform, by making the platforms that plug into something like Polkadot have a lot of users, essentially, you can incentivize other platforms to come on to Polkadot to actually get access to those users. So just by providing a mechanism for developers to get their product used, I think can really attract more people to the space and more developers to the space.
Just to expand on that a little bit, I think it's also super important for a protocol or an organization like Web3 to start experimenting a little bit more aggressively. So one of the things that drives usually the adoption is what you said, the number of people who can actually use it. But on the other hand, also implementing cutting-edge concepts and putting them into to work. All of the things that happen from Ethereum onwards, from consensus mechanisms to all of the things, Bitcoin NG, I don't know, oracles. I think just by being the most edgiest thing out there, experimenting with that, it will attract, you know, curious, smart people who are out there for a challenge. Because if you're going to look for, I don't know, developers are usually looking for two things. First one is a challenge, another one is salary. So they can go to and be an, I don't know, an Oracle developer, Erlang developer, Python, you know, they can earn big amounts of money, so they don't need blockchain. And maybe they can kind of experiment with really cool stuff, you know, that actually matters. So combining these two things, I think, might be a very, like a winning combo, I think.
Right, so the last question that I'll address here would be the idea about how enterprises are viewing the loss of privacy when they're dealing with private blockchains. So let's just do a little case study here. For example, the central bank in Singapore here would like to tokenize the Singapore dollar, which they had done in a POC called Project Ubin. If this project itself were to be deployed on the mainnet of Ethereum versus running it on its own private blockchain, is privacy the only thing that they're losing here, or what else would they be losing potentially? Having a state-owned fiat stable coin that's ran on the private blockchain network versus on the public mainnet. Do you guys get the question?
What would they lose, or what would they?
Would privacy be the only thing that banks lose, or what else is there involved in this?
I'm trying to describe 3 scenarios, right? Number 1. This coin launches on public Ethereum network. Scenario number 2, they launch in their isolated, private, permissioned, whatever, Ethereum fork, Hyperledger Fabric, whatever.
Yes.
On number 3, they launch as a parachain in Polkadot. So let's start with mainnet, right? What do you have? Well, it's accessible to every other application, every other user on the Ethereum mainnet. Great, right? You get some usability. Bad. You suffer from privacy, right? You at least leak all the metadata, which is often enough bad enough, right? And third, you get to share the throughput with all the other applications. So you don't get far. Currently, what, 10 transactions per second? If you have a critically storm, you don't have any transaction per second left. So that's probably not a solution. Now, when you have your own private blockchain, right? Let's say an Ethereum fork or whatever that's siloed off, well, you don't have to share the transaction throughput, so you can push through more. You can even guard it off so nobody can really see what transactions are happening. But then, after all, why do you even have that blockchain, right? You might as well not bother and do that and just have a backend API that the Singaporean government or published and have that used, right? Some other means of authentication. Now, and with Polkadot, and you know, it's not possible today, but hopefully later this year or early next year, you could go a step in between, and that's what I tried to say. Where you say, for example, I start off guarded off in the sense of like I have certain authorities, right, that run the consensus, that, you know, collate transaction and come to an understanding of which transaction should be allowed and which not. You design exactly what features you want to expose to your users, but because you plug in Polkadot as a network card, right, you make this asset, this token, available to all the other chains that are connected through Polkadot, for example, Ethereum as well, without, you know, losing these kind of guarantees or leaving the safe haven that you have.
Any other thoughts from the other panelists?
It depends on how they launch it, in what way. Would it be, I mean, tokenizing $1, that means that you need to, you know, you need to deposit it somewhere and then you need to track these kind of things. So, I mean, I don't see them doing that ever, because you can control a lot of things in this. I mean, once the token economics are set, you cannot change them on the fly. I mean, maybe you can, but it kind of. So this is one of the things that we're discussing quite heavily internally, is that these are not pixels. I mean, these are bytes that we're, you know, playing around, but these can have like real world effects, especially in a case like where someone wants to launch a sovereign currency tokenized on something. So experiments are good, but until something has been launched, like on Ethereum network and test it and pen test it from many angles, it's kind of not the best thing to do unless your ship is burning. So I don't know if I.
I mean, one interesting thing from like tokenizing a sovereign currency is like all the control you get over things like money laundering and actually knowing who has what amount of currency at all times. Like very, very interesting, very scary in a way for a sovereign currency. But like I do think if I was a central bank, I would be really tempted to try to figure out a way to make this work because of all of the the actually increased control you could have over what's happening and who has what.
Right, yeah, so just join me to thank the panelists here. So we have Dieter from Web3, Björn from Parity, and Luka from Eternity. Thank you everyone for tonight. Thank you.